Recording in progress.
All right, good evening and welcome to the Federal Way City Council meeting, the special meeting for June 6th of 2023. Would you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
That's so funny, I can tell. All right. Well, welcome everybody. We've got a study session on the Housing Action Plan Implementation Code Amendments. We'll have a staff report from Sarah Bridgeford and Cheney Skadson.
Hi, good evening, Mayor, Council President Kochmar, Deputy Mayor, Honda, and the rest of the council. Good evening. I'm Cheney Skadson, and I am a senior planner and trying to get the PowerPoint up. There we go. Okay, wonderful. This evening, I'm going to be presenting, but I'm here with both Keith Niven, Community Development Director, and Sarah Bridgeford, Community Services Manager. The policy discussion, or the question tonight is, should the City Council approve changes to the Federal Way Revised Code, Section 19110, which is our affordable housing regulations, to improve housing production in the city center and community business zones? And this will be at the later council meeting with an ordinance. So the current regulations are that for new projects in the city of Federal Way, if they involve 25 units or more, so this is multifamily or more units, at least 2 or 5% of those units are required to be income restricted, whichever is more. So 5% of 25 units is 1.25 units, so that would be 2 units. It would be rounding up because 2 units is greater than that 5%. And the requirement is that those income restricted units, if they're used for rental, they shall be serving incomes or households at 50% AMI. If by any chance those multifamily units are for home ownership, our code specifies that those can serve incomes at 80% AMI. But a majority of stacked or multifamily developments that we've seen so far and expect are rental products. And that income requirement, or the restricted units that are income restricted, affordable housing, are required for the life of the project, and that's done through recording a restrictive covenant with the county. And the way the code reads now is that when a project is required to provide those income restricted units, there's something that operates kind of like a density bonus. So for our multifamily zones, or zones that allow multifamily in it, that are based on minimum or maximum densities, you're allowed to surpass that maximum density up to 10% for each affordable unit you provide. The problem with the way the code is written is that these zones that we're discussing today, City Center Core, City Center Frame, and our BC zone, community business, are not density-based zones. The number of units are defined or basically a result of other development regulations, such as the requirement for open space and parking and other things, and maximum height of the building, that end up defining the maximum number of units that are feasible in a project. So the way the code is written right now, that benefit of having a bonus density provides no benefit, because there wasn't a defined maximum that the developer is unable to surpass. So that's why we're trying to amend our regulations, update our toolbox here with some proposed changes that affect those zones that aren't density, that aren't based on maximum density. So that the intention here is that those income restricted affordable units that are required under this provision will have their parking requirements waived or exempt from providing parking. We often hear that parking is a large financial commitment as part of a project, and can really hurt or end the feasibility of a project. The process we've taken so far to get here is first started back in 2021 when Council adopted the Housing Action Plan that provided a strategic framework or framework or plan for how we're going to address our housing needs as the city grows. In the beginning of 2021, we received a grant, a $100,000 grant from the Department of Commerce to help implement some of the strategies from that housing action plan. And we hired a consultant, and you've all seen the report from Heartland that we received back in February, and tonight is the second reading of that code. Since this is a deliverable-based contract from the Department of Commerce, there's a requirement to have the code adopted by a certain deadline, which is the end of June. Oops. Okay, so I just want to spend a moment to refresh what the Housing Action Plan said. We identified 4 Housing Action Plan objectives and 7 strategies that help achieve those objectives. The first one is to promote choice, so expand the housing options in the city that is inclusive to the community's needs. The second objective is to encourage home ownership options and support equitable housing outcomes, considering that our future multifamily development is likely, as we hear from developers, going to be rental products. This HAPI code update isn't really implementing that objective. But for the third one, to plan for continued growth and ensure that the built environment promotes community development and increases the quality of life for Federal Way's existing and future residents. I believe that updating this strategy is helpful in implementing that objective. And then finally, our last objective is to preserve the existing affordable housing stock to reduce displacement pressure. So this is particularly important as we discuss changes to this code amendment. Displacement risk can be evident in multiple ways. One way in particular is when you're priced out of a unit. For example, you can afford to live there and then they raise the prices and you are financially displaced. You can no longer afford to stay there. There are other forms of displacement like cultural and physical displacement if a building is demolished. But in terms of this code provision and what the existing code requires now versus how it could change is the value of being an anti-displacement tool. So those income-restricted units serving for the life of the project. Okay, so you've all probably heard me or Keith say or discuss this housing target of 11,260 units by 2044. However, now we have that number disaggregated by income band, which is our area median income by AMI. And that is something that was determined through a lot of work through the countywide planning policies and different methodologies to identify those income bands, and this is what it looks like, and it's still being adopted or going through the adoption process through the county, but here's an idea of what it looks like. You may notice that a lot of our future housing need is on both ends of the spectrum, dramatically over the market rate, over 120% AMI. But I want to really point your direction to these income categories, which is our severely or our low income, which is below 80% AMI, and our very low income bands, which is below 80% AMI and below 50% AMI. As I mentioned before, this tool we have, our affordable housing regulations, regulate if it's an ownership option, those units to be affordable at 80% AMI, and then if they're rental, affordable at 50% AMI. So 7% of our future housing over the next 20 years, we should be planning to accommodate 7% of that being income restricted at 50% AMI.
Kenny, back on that last slide, what does the non-PSH and PSH, what does that mean?
Great question. So PSH stands for permanent supportive housing, and that's a new use or a housing type in our code. And PSH is a housing type that often includes services and is targeted to serve those that are experiencing homelessness. Whereas non-PSH could be having an ADU in your backyard and having your grandparents live there for free, and it being 0% AMI, like if there's maybe income restricted or not income restricted on like a no income basis and not paying.
Council President.
So Cheney, could you go over, I know we're talking about low income and below that, but what was our housing target for Margaret, I mean, have we met our low-income housing targets? I mean, don't we have targets for different sectors of the economy?
Yes, and that's what this is, and maybe this bar graph will help.
Confusing to me, yeah.
So this bar graph shows our existing housing stock by income band, and which is the baseline supply, which is in yellow, and then the total future need is in blue, and that gap between the blue and the yellow also equal to the gray. That's those new units that were needed.
So are we talking just about low income, or are we talking about all types of incomes?
This
I'm trying to
table and the table before and this bar graph are talking about the housing needed by each income level. Over 120% AMI, down to 0 to 30% AMI. So the topic for discussion today is around the 30 to 50, but I wanted to just provide context to what our housing needs are across the spectrum.
Okay, so again, I'm getting just a little bit confused. So I thought that 40% of our housing target was for low income, correct? Is that correct?
No. Looking at this table, or I can go back one, of the total housing need of the 11,260 units needed by 2044, 5,372 are needed for above 120% AMI, and that's 48%. So so if we added up everything below 80%, so I don't want to do mental math, it's like 16 plus 8 plus 7 plus 2 plus 9, like we could then, accumulate that, but a majority, over half is needed over the 100% AMI. Sorry.
You threw a bunch of numbers out real fast. about
I'm
the-
kind of confused.
Okay.
There are way more housing units needed of the non-low income than the low
Yeah,
income,
that's my
to
point.
simplify it.
That's what I was trying to get at. So what is it? Because it's all mushed together here.
Each column in this table, we can go through each column. Each column in this table includes how many housing units we need to be planning for as part of our target.
Yeah, I got that.
But, so between the non-PSH, the 0 to 30% AMI, 17, or almost 1,800 units. Okay, between the PSH 0 to 30 is 976 units.
I think Jack knows what I'm talking, go ahead, Jack.
Can I ask a clarifying question on
course.
that? Explain to me who is PHA 0 to 30%? What is the demographic? What does that house and that person look like? What are they making, and what is that? What are we really talking about? Because I don't quite understand.
I'll do my best and then let someone jump in. So PSH, that's permanent supportive housing.
Is that like
Is that what the county is doing with?
Is that like SHAG, or is that like we're giving them a free place to live, or we're housing them and somebody's not collecting any money?
Most permanent supportive housing will charge rent. That's 30% of their income towards that rental unit. It is typically, permanent supportive housing will typically be for a person or household exiting homelessness. So we have William J. Wood, which is the Veterans Project. It would include the Health Through Housing site at the extended stay, not the Red Lion, that's a shelter. It's a little bit different, but it is for people who are exiting homelessness. May I go?
So can I ask, would that mean it's like the 2 hotels King County purchased, plus the E.J. Wood? Is that what we're talking about?
Not both hotels, only the extended stay. The Red Lion is not
Okay.
permanent supportive housing.
So we're talking about getting 1,799 extended stays, kind of.
No, 946.
946.
What's a 1,700 one?
That is the housing target for 0 to 30%. That's non-PSH. That means outside of that permanent supportive housing, the city's housing target would be an additional 1,799 units by 2044.
And I think that you said that would be like an ADU where the grandparents are living in back or something like that.
Yes,
and
that's an example. Yeah,
Okay, that's what we talked about last night.
yes.
Got
yeah,
it.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions at this point? All right, go ahead, Jenny.
Okay, great. And now I'm just going to kind of unpack to provide context to what housing affordability looks like now. So every year, the area median income is updated, And for a family of four, 100% AMI, the median income is over $146,000 a year. So for our, if we're focusing on the 50% AMI, those that would be served by rental affordable housing units required through our provisions, our tool here. This is households earning less than $50,000 for one-person household, less than $55,000 for a two-person household, and et cetera. That in rent, that looks like, oops. Sorry, I don't know how to move this thing out of the way. In rent, that looks like for a studio, over $1,100, for a one-bedroom, over $1,200, for a two-bedroom, getting close to $1,500, and for a three-bedroom, over $1,600. So those are rents that are affordable to households at 50% AMI. So these would be, like, for example, this is actually using the 2022 data, but these would possibly serve as the maximum rent an apartment complex could charge for those income-restricted units at 50% AMI.
All right, Deputy Mayor?
So what is the typical rent in Federal Way for 2, 3-bedroom unit?
So typical rent, that can be very, like.
Market rate.
vast.
What's
So
market?
I mean, even market rate, a lot of our market rate developments are old and can be considered naturally affordable or naturally occurring affordable housing where they're not like deed restricted to be lower, to serve lower income or very low income, but they might have rents that are low because of no amenities or an old complex. But the rents that we assume to be market rate today are in the packet, and for a one-bedroom, we have, for like a studio of market rate is $1,700, and one bedroom at market rate is over $2,200, and for a two-bedroom at market rate, over $2,700 a month.
Is that typical for South King County, or are we higher than other cities in South King County?
In this analysis, we didn't compare, but
Okay.
I would say that there are not a lot to compare in Federal Way, but there is more competition for market rate outside of the city, so we would need to look into that further, but there are more numbers at least out there.
Thank you.
Councilmember Walsh?
Yeah, you mentioned that some of our existing housing is, in fact, you just said that the market rate for a studio was what, 17?
Yeah, over $1,700.
Okay, okay, so that would be the 50%, well, no, okay, all right. If there are units that right now, because of their age or whatever, the market rate fits within this realm, does that count towards our affordable housing?
Well, that would be existing housing. So that's what this bar graph is.
So if existing housing falls down to that affordable housing rate, can that help take care of some of that requirement?
So the housing target is for future need. So the new development, and I guess if your question is if existing housing today can, like that may be serving 80% AMI, but in 10 years serve like a 50% AMI, is that your question?
Yes,
I think that, we would have to, well, we in an iterative process or periodically are updating or understanding how our housing stock is changing. But we're focused on the future housing units, the newly built ones for the target.
okay. But if we're focused on the future housing units, future housing isn't just new housing, but future housing is what is becoming of existing housing also.
I think
Did you follow what I mean there?
I think, not necessarily, no, I don't think I follow, because I think the housing target is new units, new development.
Additional, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
it is.
I understand that it's additional units, but if some of the existing housing falls lower, wouldn't it make it so that there could be more future units that were higher and less need for future units that are lower because some of the existing units are going lower?
So our housing do you want to answer?
Sure.
Okay.
So,
Did that make sense to you, Keith?
yeah, absolutely.
to me.
So I don't think you want as your housing strategy to meet your lowest income housing units that all of your existing housing is going to depreciate to a point where it fills those lower levels. Because what's going to happen is none of that is regulated by covenant. It's what Cheney referred to earlier as naturally occurring affordable housing. And what happens once those projects get so low, then they typically get redeveloped, and then the prices go up again. So as we plan for those number of units, so those bandwidths that were given as planning figures, we need to have tools that help us get there with the new housing that's getting built. What's happening with the existing housing stock, whether it's going down or up, you know, we don't control any of that because none of it's controlled by covenants or any other tools that the city can necessarily push or pull on. So I think I understand what you're saying, and I think you're right. It could happen by default, but what that means is all of our housing stock is depreciating to the point where it's being affordable to folks that aren't making much money, and I don't think that's necessarily a strategy we're after. We're trying to kind of hold everything that's in existence somewhere around market, or if it happens to be at 90% or 80% now of market, that stays at that income band, and the new stuff that we're planning for is kind of working its way on those bookends, both the lower levels and the upper levels that we need to meet our targets.
Okay.
Councilmember Adobe.
Yeah, I just have a couple questions. It seems to me that we're all concerned about future people moving to Federal Way. And we're not talking about people that already live here who can't afford to live here in their house that they bought 20 years ago, that they're going to have to leave because they can't afford that house. And it just seems that maybe we should be flipping this around a little bit. Why are we planning for people that aren't here now and planning for people that are here in Twin Lakes, Marine Hills, the Ridge, that are turning 60, 70 years old that can't afford the taxes anymore because they're down to $50,000 a year or $40,000 a year? So, I mean, it's just something we should be talking about, in my opinion, instead of worrying about some guy 20 years from now that's not even here.
But I think maybe,
But we got to do both.
exactly. Took the words out of my mouth, Councilmember.
But, you know, if we're so concerned, which we should be, for people to have affordability, I think what the message we should be talking about is maybe we should have everybody pay their fair share that lives here, all 100,000 people, to finance this, instead of just the developers that are coming in to build in our community. And then everybody's sharing on the people who can't afford to live here instead of just the people who want to develop in Federal Way. And we're always talking about what the fee's going to be for the new guy coming in and building. We missed all of the last 10 years of everything in all the cities around. And maybe we should be thinking differently than the way we are.
Can you explain what you mean by that? I don't know.
What's that?
Can you explain what you just said?
Well, what I said is, you know, we're talking about building a whole bunch of houses at Sound Transit, and we're talking about somebody who maybe wants to build in Kitt's Corner, and we're talking about making those developers, through our code, pay for the subsidized lower housing through lower rents that they're collecting so somebody could live there. I mean, that's what this is all about, in my opinion. If we're so concerned, and which we should be, that 1,000 people can't afford to live in Federal Way, if that's the 842 and the 208 numbers on this graph, then why are we penalizing just the new people coming in or the people developing to fund that? So if it's such a big concern, why doesn't everybody in Federal Way pay $100 or get taxed $100 to subsidize for those people to come in? Why are we putting it all on the back of the business and the developers instead of the whole whole?
Cheney, Keith, do
That's
you have
just
any?
a comment.
Yeah, exactly. It's the policy decision that we're making. Let's see what, Cheney, if you want to take a stab at it, or maybe and/or Keith?
Oh, I think that our, I think that our housing target isn't just about people moving to the area. There are, generations that are growing up in Federal Way and moving out and don't have a housing option here that meets their needs, so they leave. So our housing target isn't about taking on, all people moving into the area. It's about meeting the growing housing need by our households growing to an age that they're ready to move out and have their own housing option. So I think I'd respond first with that, and then.
So I think it's a great policy question, council member. So the last city I worked for was on the east side. We were a member of Arch. We paid part of our general fund into help fund the Arch program, as do the other cities that are Arch members. That is the taxpayers basically paying for another tool in the toolbox. We have one tool in our toolbox right now, which is the inclusionary zoning requirement. I agree with you. Yes, that does. It works more like an impact fee in that it targets developers to basically provide a share. I think there could be a conversation about should the city be putting another tool in the toolbox and funding a housing trust fund in some way.
Thank you.
Interesting.
Okay, Councilmember Tran.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And then Council President.
I agree with what Jenny was saying a couple of minutes ago about this plan. This is not about for the new people coming to the city. I often heard from council members and the people in community talking about young people who were born and raised in this city and went to college and get the degree, and then they have to move out of Federal Way because they can't afford to live in the city. So with this plan, at least we try to figure out ways to help those people to retain our people in this city. So, I mean, I'm fine with this plan. So I just want to add that. Thank you.
Council President.
So the housing targets are given to us by whom?
Well, the the 11,260 was generated from the state, I think the Office of Financial Management, which is then doled out to all of the counties. And then each of those counties, ours being King County, allocated those units.
Yeah, okay, I got
To-
that. Probably through Puget Sound Regional Council.
I
That-
think
that
it's down to
doesn't
the
matter.
countywide planning policies.
Yeah, okay. So would you go to the bar graph?
Sure.
This graph with bar graph. No, that graph, thank you. So what I'm trying to understand is what is our target for the percentage for the lower income, and what is our target for the percentage for the higher income?
Sure.
Over and above.
Okay, so out of 100% of the future housing target of the 11,260, 48% is above 120% AMI.
So which
That's the I'm going to go from the farthest on the right down. So that's 120, over 120% AMI is 48% of the future need. 10% of the future housing target, I shouldn't have said need, of the target is between 100 and 120% AMI.
Sure, but
So now going down, now getting closer to 80 to 100%, that's 9% of our units. Now we're getting to low income. 50 to 80% AMI is low income, and that is 2%. And then below 50% AMI, which is very low income, that's 7% of our future housing target. 8% is our PSH, and 16% is our non-PSH.
so let's go with the target on the right, the bar graph on the right. Just explain that one bar graph to me.
Okay, so the yellow is the supply of housing at that income band. And the blue is the supply plus the new need, the target.
So, but that target, that's what I'm trying to get at. What is that target? Is the target both lower and a higher income need? What is that target?
So for the one, it's on the bottom of the graph, there's, it says 120. That's the 120% AMI. So that is not low income. That is over the median. That is
Yeah,
a family of four making more than $150,000 a year.
That's what I figured. So could you, without getting into the bar graph, can you just give me a percentage over and above what you think the percentage we need, our target is for the lower and a percentage for the higher
So our, 7% for our very low income.
is our target,
For very low income is 7%.
correct? And then the low income.
What are those numbers on the left? 2,000, 4,000, 6,000?
Those are
What
housing.
are those people or those dwelling units?
Housing units.
So that's 3,800 dwelling units for the very, very low on the far left, plus. Is that what that blue stands for?
Yeah, we have the exact numbers, but in total, yeah.
So it's 3,800 plus what is that for the percentage?
I mean,
The yellow is the current housing.
This is the supply. Yellow is
The
the,
current
the
supply,
supply of our
current
housing
supply.
stock.
Let's get Brian to chime in here.
Yeah, could you go back to one slide with the, yeah, so, and I think the other one says the same thing, but I think to your question, Council President, is what is market and what is, and I think saying what's affordable, what's low income, there's different tiers that we're talking about, but if you were to say market and what is not market, you've got 58%, if you add up 48 and 10, that is above 100%, well, that's market. And I think these are the county AMI, this is a King County AMI, so even our 80% is considered market. So if you add that second one, it's a total of, what is that, 67%? So 2/3 of the need is market rate. And the rest is, the other third is not market rate.
Not market rate, meaning
Yeah.
what?
Low income.
Would
Low
would
income.
require subsidy or,
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I'm
requirement.
trying to understand that.
Yeah, so it's 2 to 1,
So we have,
basically.
okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, actually, Councilmember Dovey, would you mind moving that flask? I think sometimes, there we go. Okay, thank you very much.
but I'm kind of slow on this number. Can I ask one more question?
Oh, yeah, of course.
So we need 11,400 units, correct? That's the number we're talking about, 11,400.
260.
And if you take 48 and 10, that's 58%, and 9 is 67. That's how many, and we multiply that by 11,400. Is that how many units are on the top, on that side?
That's how many market rate units we
Yeah.
need by 2024.
So 2% of the 11,400, which is under 300, is what we're talking about in that middle graph. Is that correct?
Yes. So the big deficiencies are the extremes, is the very low income.
I'm just trying to find out how many units we're talking about. It's roughly 300 of the 50 to 80%.
Yeah, you just take 11,000 and multiply it by the
Yeah,
percentage.
and then the 30 to, and then the 30 to 50%, you take 7%, which is,
842 units.
got it, okay. Now I understand your graph.
Okay, Councilmember Sepa Dawson.
Yeah, I just wanted to share the importance of having these in place, and I know you're concerned about developers not coming here, but this is not Federal Way's unique issue. Every city, this is actually something that we all have to do and share the burden. Yeah, as I'm listening to council have this conversation, I think it's very important that we set aside these units, or the people who need the services or who need the housing will not be served. And I'm concerned about that very much so. And 7% and 2% is not as much as the 67% that we're talking about here. So the target is still meeting the needs of the people who can afford market rate. And I personally don't feel we have enough even for the, based on the target that we have, because earlier you said for 25%, for 25 unit housing is 1.5 or so, right? And so roughly, and that's only one unit. We're asking somebody who builds multifamily to, it's not even giving up, but to reduce the rent. And so I don't, if it were up to me, I would even increase the rate, because I know the need for people. I don't even know if we're eliminating homelessness, but at least we're making it affordable for people who do have a job but still can't afford to pay the rent. And the increase in rent doesn't even compare to inflation rate that we're experiencing right now. So it's between paying rent and buying food. And so, and we're not even touching that, we're not even having that conversation. So I think this is important, and I think it's important that we continue doing this. And I don't think it matters who's telling us these numbers, because the numbers have to be met regionally. And it's about housing people, otherwise we're gonna have more homeless people out on the street.
All right, thank you. And thank you for, you've got a lifetime of experience and professional work on this, so thank you very much for your work. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. So these targets are assuming that the affordable housing we have now stays in place and we don't lose any of it.
I don't know. I would need to look into that to understand all of the assumptions. This is, they base there's 3 methodologies that the county evaluated, how to equitably distribute the housing targets by income band across cities. If there is more affordable housing in one city than another, there was different approaches or methodologies to determine what is equitable. And I don't have the materials to go over what methodology, how either of the methodologies would impact Better Way, but that's, I think, been decided. And while this hasn't been ratified yet by the county, these are the result of that methodology that I think in comparison to some of the higher income cities, and I can provide more information on how our breakdown by income level compares to our neighbors and to Seattle, but we have a much higher target for above 100% AMI than other cities.
Okay. And what role does SCIP play in, so Keith talked about Arch, and we have SCIP. And I know that they're not the same, but does SCIP play in any way with this?
Please speak to it.
You guys are doing really good nonverbal communication.
Right.
We're trying. So SCIP does play a role in affordable housing, and we as a city are a member jurisdiction to SCIP. Last year was the first year that SCIP had the capital fund, and that was supported with and I shouldn't reference the House bill, but I'm going to in absence of the RCW, but House Bill 1406 allowed a recapture of a portion of the existing sales tax. So that is the primary funding source at this point for that capital fund. At some point in the future, that could look a little bit different with SCIP and have additional funding sources like Arch. Keith referenced general funds from cities. There have been some other structures that are used as well. And that might be something that expands in the future, but isn't in place at this time.
So the cities that are in Arch put additional monies into Arch for affordable housing, and SCIP doesn't do that yet.
And Arch has had a longer history, so
Right.
they've expanded those funding sources. And SCIP, with that 1406, it's just that first step.
Okay,
We do general fund transfers, but it's mainly for operations of the organization. It's not for the capital that Sarah's talking about.
okay, thank you.
Councilmember Walsh, then Council President, Coach Mar.
Couple of, first one comment, I guess, is one concern I have is that all of these new units will come from developers. And one concern I have is if we are placing too much burden on the developer, basically we're killing the golden goose, and there won't be any, it'll limit the number of new units, and it'll defeat defeat things in all of these different categories, not just the low income, but in every category, if developers are not wanting to come here to develop. And so I think that we need to be careful not to be hindering development to begin with. And so, Council Member Assefa Dawson was saying, hey, we ought to be doing more. But I mean, if we do more, we could be killing everything. And so I think that there needs to be a careful balance with that. And then a question, with this 7%, the 842, 30 to 50%, and even the 50 to 80%, there are some organizations that are looking at bringing stuff in. For example, Centro de la Raza is looking at building units. And I think there's some other, NSC I think is looking at more units as well. How much of what they are doing would address this need without us having to to burden the developers.
I'm not familiar with any multifamily development projects coming in right now serving 80% AMI outside of what's required. But that doesn't mean that doesn't exist. I think an important distinction here too is like there are market rate developers that are impacted currently as the code is written. And there are also developers that we know very well like DevCo that are exclusively affordable developers, right? All of those units are affordable at 60% AMI. Something that's different with this tool, with affordable, like with this affordable housing regulations as inclusionary zoning, is that the city's able to create a mixed income project that isn't exclusively affordable that you see in some products, and it's not exclusively unaffordable, but it is trying to maximize a sweet spot that doesn't deter developers, but also allows the city to grow in an inclusive way so that the community that exists here that might need units that are affordable at 50% AMI are being integrated into new development and integrated as the city grows.
All right, thank you.
Council President?
Well, I almost think, for me, it's kind of like a joke. I mean, honest to gosh, who in Federal Way is making $146,000 a year? I'm sure that's per family. That would be at AMI, 50% AMI. I mean, for me, it's kind of like these numbers kind of don't match. I mean, so I know that, for example, Arch, Redmond, Bellevue need affordable housing. They didn't provide for that, and I know putting the money into Arch probably tried to help that, but I think there's a real lack of affordable housing in that area. We have more affordable housing in our area, but we've been behind what we need to do is provide housing, and I think we can do that, well, I'm trying to get to what I'm trying to say, with our types of housing that we offer. For example, Councilmember Tran talked about the young folks who can't afford to live here, and Councilmember Dovey talked about the older folks who can't afford to live here, and that's true. Our older folks, for example, move out of Federal Way because there isn't any housing available for. It's not that they can't afford it; it's that it's not available. For example, they'll go up to Lakeland Hills or Northeast Tacoma or move to Arizona, and so we need to provide different types. And I think you're getting at that, the different types of housing availability. It's just that we need to have a real mix for our total population. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. I will be happy to share a breakdown of the housing targets by income band for Federal Way compared to some of those Arch cities. So you can see how much low-income housing they're planning for versus us. I'll follow up with that. Okay, so another.
How many pages do you have left?
10. Just joking.
Do I? No. Like 5. I have 5 left.
Let's do this, council. Let's, right now, we're going to quarter till the hour. Let's let, Cheney, let's get you all the way through your presentation, and then if you guys could, write down your questions, let's get her through her presentation, because we do want a few minutes before the council. So if that's okay, council? Go ahead, Cheney.
Okay, I guess to conclude the conversation about the housing targets by income band, our housing target for this income band at 50% AMI is 7, and our code requires 5% of new units. If that makes sense. Okay, great. So the affordable housing tools we have, the one we're talking about today, it's for the life of the project, so that's not vulnerable to displacement risk. So that's not like, for example, our MFTE program that has a term limit to it, that maybe there's units affordable at a certain income level, but those will expire, or other housing. This is something that would maintain. So I'm just going to jump through. I'm not going to go over the methodology, but our first scenario here is what is the financial impact to the developer for providing income restricted units? And this example is as proposed as the code. So this is an example of a project with 233 units. Based on those market rate rents we went over earlier, that would result in about $550,000 monthly revenue if those are all income restricted units. Our code would require 5%, so that would mean 12 units would need to be affordable. And then we're calculating what's the difference between the monthly revenue, the operational financial impact of a monthly revenue is $12,000 for those 12 units to be affordable at 5% AMI. That results in a annual impact of nearly $150,000, and if we were to look at a 50-year time period, about $7.5 million. I think what's really important here is that's only a 2.2 reduction in revenue to provide those units. Something worth pointing out is the developer or the property manager or the operator is worried about these monthly costs. The developer may be different. Those are not necessarily the same people. So this benefit that we're proposing, where there's a financial, an upfront financial benefit to not providing providing parking spaces for those affordable units, the developer would see immediate cost savings of $1.2 million. So that's what it looks like with how it's proposed. 5% of units at 50% AMI without requiring parking for those affordable units. In another scenario, if we were to reduce that to 4% of units instead of 5 at the same income level, it's a 1.8% reduction in the operation, is an operational financial impact of 1.8%. So they're losing 1.8% on a monthly basis. Whereas the upfront financial benefit to not having to provide the parking spaces for those new units that are affordable is less than $1 million. I think something that I also need to point out here is that this requirement, not only are we concerned about the financial impact to the developer and the operator of those units, but also the households that have secured housing that meets their income level and they're not cost burdened. So in this scenario, 10 households of very low income will achieve stable housing at any time. And over the lifetime of the project, that results in a really large number of households having able to more likely have their basic needs met because they're not cost burdened. So those are the two scenarios, whether we evaluate between a 5% required income restricted units or 4%. Another option is to specify the term limited. So like right now, it's for the life of the project, which is over 50 years, and an option would be to limit that to 50 years so that after 50 years, those units could then be returned to market rate. And another alternative is to have a combination of these tools. We've also discussed allowing a fee in lieu, but because other code sections would need to be amended, that's not an option for right now for meeting the Department of Commerce deliverable deadline. And that's the mayor's recommendation is to approve the ordinance as currently written, so retaining the 5% units at 50% AMI and waiving the parking requirements for those affordable units.
Councilor Dovey?
Yeah, I have a question. Earlier in your presentation, you used the number, if somebody had, I think, 25 units, it was, our thing, it was 1.2 they had to give, and you rounded it up to 2. Mm-hmm. In these scenarios, do we always round up, or could we round down?
It's rounding up, it's in the code, but that is a code provision.
But
Yeah.
that's, could be hundreds of thousands of dollars to somebody if you round up from 9.5 to 10 versus 9.5 to 9. I mean,
Over the life of the project, yeah, we could calculate what that impact would be.
because when I look at these graphs, and they're very good, we're basically saying in a 5%, we'll give you $1.2 million, but you're going to spend $7 million to get it. And on the other one, where we go to 4%, we're going to say we're going to give you $980,000, but you got to pay $9 million to get it.
No, you
I mean,
save.
That's what we're saying, because we're basically telling the developer 1.2% or 1.8% of your profits or your operating capital, not counting your interest on the project and everything, is going to support low-income housing. And on the other one, it's 2%. Well, I mean, it's 2.2 is worse than 1.8. but I just keep looking back at how many developments did we get in the last 10 years?
Oh,
And
lots
how
of
many
10?
went to Kent and Auburn and everywhere else, and nobody else has this, I don't believe.
I think there are a number of elements that influence whether a developer wants to develop in our city. And I think that, yes, this is an impact, but there are a number of things that the city is doing to offset. This is a policy decision about whether we want mixed income developments or not. Do we want to require that as the city grows, it is inclusive to different income levels, and that we'll require it? Or if it will result in exclusively market rate, or in cases like we've seen before with Uptown Square and some of these other LIHTC funded properties that are exclusively affordable. So something that was discussed heavily with the Housing Action Plan is, well, how do we achieve mixed income units, mixed income projects, where it doesn't concentrate one or the other, but is inclusive of both? And removing this tool or reducing it makes it harder to provide those units for an inclusive development.
All right, Councilmember Walsh, then Councilmember Tran.
What kind of feedback have we gotten from developers? I mean, basically with this scenario, let's go to scenario number, well, you have scenario number 2 up on the screen right now. So basically, they would have an upfront savings by eliminating the parking requirements of nearly $1 million.
Yes.
But their long-term sacrifice would be nearly $6 million over 50 years. $1 million now, $6 million over 50 years. I mean, if you're to invest the $1 million now, you'd probably end up with a lot more than $6 million over 50 years. But what are developers saying about that? What have we got feedback from the developers themselves?
Yeah, we often hear what breaks a project is having high parking minimums. So a lot of the city has kind of high parking standards in some areas, in some zones. So reducing the parking requirement or eliminating it to achieve these units is desired. Having a reduction in parking demand or requirement is in response to what lever can we pull that alleviates some of the reasons that make a project not pencil. Parking is, we often hear parking is what breaks a project.
Okay.
It's good feedback. Councilmember Tran, then the Deputy Mayor, and then Councilmember Sefadossin. Okay, Councilmember Sefadossin, and then the Deputy Mayor. All right.
I'll wait, no problem.
Councilmember Tran?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councilmember Walsh, to brought up that upfront cost saving for the developer, because I just did a really quick calculation here. If they save, on the other slide, can you go back? There, okay, so the operational financial impact for them is $7.4 million per year.
Over 50 years.
Over 50,
Yes.
yes, thank you. But the upfront, they save $1.2 million. If they use that $1.2 million and invest with the conservative return rate of 5% for 50 years, they will end up almost $14 million. So there's an incentive there for the developers.
Yeah, I think another way to think about it as well is that the market rate units, those can be upgraded with higher finishings, and there could be there could be offsetting the monthly cost of those subsidized units in other ways.
Real quick?
Yeah.
Well, actually, let's go, we'll put you in the queue. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. So I'm concerned with the parking requirements, eliminating some parking, only because we currently see maybe 2 or 3 vehicles per unit, depending on where the units are. And then we have parking over spilling into the streets. And I hear often during the week from people who are concerned about vehicles parked along the streets causing some issues with sight you know, sight, being able to see, and, anyway, so if we don't require enough parking, then we will be assuming that people will be parking on the streets or trying to find some other parking. And how is that going to be handled?
I guess before I answer that first question, I think something to keep in mind that this isn't a code provision that is promoted, or this isn't going to apply in our multifamily zones or our BN zones. These are targeted. This provision is targeted to our city center core, our city center frame, and our BC, which are areas of the city that will be and are currently heavily served by transit.
Okay. So we're assuming then that if they move into those zones, that they won't have as many vehicles.
I think it's fair to assume that the developments in these areas that we're targeting this development or this regulation is that there is less parking demand than in comparison to like our multifamily zones that are
Outside
a
the
little
zone.
farther from some amenities and transit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Sapadowson?
Thank you, Mayor. I think as we're talking about this, I keep going back to humans, people that are going to be impacted. And so I know my fellow council members are worried about the financial implication to the developers, but I go back to people. So we're trying to serve people. We're trying to make sure that they are housed. And so if we think of it that way, maybe there will be a change of heart in terms of how we look at this, because we don't like what we're seeing now, and it's going to get worse if we continue on this trend of housing being more and more expensive for people who need it, people who are working. We always talk about that. And, you know, on the spectrum, we're just going to have more people not being able to live. So I just want to look at it as how it's going to impact people's lives and emphasize that more than emphasize the financial gain or loss. And I know I'm not a financial guru, and I work with people, and so I come from a perspective that it's going to affect and impact people. And I think that's what we need to really talk about.
Okay.
I just had a quick clarifying question. The parking is something we haven't done in the past, correct? This is kind of a new, we just brought it up, correct? This is an addition.
This is a new proposal.
And I want to clarify, are we going to give this parking to anybody in any zone that does this development, or only downtown?
As proposed, this is to apply to zones that aren't based on density, don't have a maximum density, and so that's city center core and city center frame, which includes some of downtown, and our BC, which are community business, which is a lot along Pack Highway,
Yeah.
where the Rapid Ride runs on the north part of the city, and
So like Kitt's Corner, would they get the ability of the parking, or, and also the difference of affordability? So most development areas would get parking, which now they don't get. Is that correct? Most areas that would develop a place like this, I hear Keith shaking his head, would get the parking offset.
yeah, in the city center core frame and BC zones, they would be eligible to waive their parking requirement for providing those units
Right.
that are affordable, yes.
And in your very first in the benefit, you said that somebody could get 10% more density with this. Is that anywhere in Federal Way?
So, yes, there are developments, oh. Okay, the fire station property on 320th is an example. That's zoned RM, which I don't know what the underlying district is, but that is zoned based on maximum density. So you can have this many units, max. Oh, wait, you provided 5% of affordable units. Now for each affordable unit you provided, you get another market rate unit.
Right, so you could offset the 10 you're giving away at a lower rate for 20 more. Is that, if the numbers work out?
Yeah, one additional.
Okay. And this proposal is not just for downtown, but it's every place that's developable in Federal Way that would fall under market rate or where somebody wants to develop it.
Both, but there's a distinguishing factor. So that bonus density we just went over, that's for our multifamily zones, RM, and for our BN zone. We're targeting our future growth near transit. So we're focusing this option for inclusive mixed income housing in our city center core, city center frame, and community business zone. So there is a distinction between those two. They're regulated differently. One on my left is that's with maximum densities that get the bonus, where instead of having a bonus that doesn't work on the right, we're having a waiving the parking for those units.
Okay, thank you.
Let's go one more question, and then we'll recess before the regular meeting at 6:30. Deputy
you.
Mayor?
So will this then impact the Sound Transit housing that they intend to build in their, by their station?
Yes. Sound Transit would be required to meet this requirement if they provide any multifamily over 25 units, and they would be eligible for the units that they provide and record a covenant with for 5% at 50% AMI. They would be eligible to waive those parking requirements for those affordable units that are required by our code.
Have
Not
they
for
had-
additional, like, so even with those DevCo projects, even with Uptown Square, when they're exclusively affordable at 60% AMI, we still required a city covenant in partnership with the city that 5% are affordable to meet our regulations that are for the life of the project.
And has Sound Transit looked at this proposal? Have they had any issues?
I don't know.
Okay,
I'm not sure.
thank you.
All right, well, more on that later. I'm going to be asking about that. Okay, we've got great questions, everybody. Cheney and Keith and Sarah, thank you very much for a great presentation. We will be in recess until the regular city council meeting, and very thoughtful and deliberate presentation and questions. Thank you very much. We're in recess till 6:30.